The universe was a big place, but somehow it always managed to feel cramped and musty as a worn-out boot, especially the parts where humanity had managed to settle, or perhaps a better term would be squat. Solstice Junction, one of those charming little outposts in the middle of nowhere, yet somehow in the way of everywhere, was no exception. It sat on the crumbling edge of the interplanetary highway like a half-squashed cockroach, defying the indifferent cosmos with its flickering neon sign that read, "Welcome to Solstice Junction, population. Don't ask." Captain Rylan Voss, a man who'd seen more scams than suspiciously low-priced Star fuel, stared at the sign with something resembling fondness, if fondness had a sneer and carrot a sidearm. He stepped out of his ship, the Unreliable, with a sigh heavy enough to be used as a weapon in certain gravity fields. The Unreliable had once been reliable, and its name was either a tribute to irony or the universe's way of calling Rylan a bloody fool. Probably both. The docking bay smelled of ozone and fried circuitry, with a delightful undertone of despair. Rylan tiptoed over a puddle of what he hoped was just hydraulic fluid and not something that had crawled out of the maintenance shaft and died of embarrassment. "Hey, Captain," a voice called out, as greasy as the bacon substitute on the station's breakfast menu. Rylan turned to see Grogger, the station's self-appointed mayor, all 5 feet of him, wearing an expression that suggested he had just invented a new way to lose money. "Grogger," Rylan nodded, adjusting his coat to make sure his blaster was visible. "Still conning tourists into buying those authentic Earth artifacts?" "Nah," Grogger grinned, a toothy affair that could probably chew through hull plating. "Got a new scam. Everyone's talking about it. Earth's the new hotspot for all the interstellar nuts and pilgrims." "Pilgrims?" Rylan snorted. "Last time I checked, Earth was a rock with more craters than a teenager's face." Grogger chuckled. "Times change, Captain. Now it's a sacred ground or some such nonsense. Cults everywhere are flocking back to the cradle of humanity." "Cults?" Rylan rubbed his temple. It felt like he was massaging a grenade, as if the galaxy wasn't already full of those. "These are different," Grogger insisted, leaning in conspiratorially. "They're organized, got ships, weapons, and a sense of fashion that makes a black hole look colorful." "And the interstellar peace?" Rylan asked, more for formality's sake than any hope for a positive answer. Grogger shrugged. "Fragile as a soap bubble in a sandstorm. Everyone's pointing guns at everyone else, and the only thing stopping them from pulling triggers is that they are too busy worshipping whatever's left of Earth." "Fantastic," Rylan muttered, a dry smile on his face. "Well, I suppose I should go see what all the fuss is about." "Good luck," Grogger said, though his tone suggested that what he really meant was, "Glad it's not me." Rylan made his way through the market, a bustling chaos of stalls selling everything from dubious foodstuffs to questionable morality. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of desperation and burnt synth spice. He stopped by a stall manned by a creature with more limbs than was strictly necessary, each one busy trying to sell a different piece of junk masquerading as a treasure. "Looking for something, Captain," it chirped, its voice like static on an old radio. "Information," Rylan said, flicking a coin in the air. "About Earth and why everyone suddenly wants to kiss its dirt." The creature caught the coin with one of its many hands, pocketing it with a speed that suggested a long career in petty theft. "Ah, the cult of stars. They say Earth is where it all began, where it all will end. A new age or a new plague depends on who you ask." "And what do you say?" Rylan leaned in, eyes sharp as a laser scalpel. "I say," it grinned, revealing teeth that could double as a graveyard, "humans are crazy, always have been, but this time they might just take the rest of us with them." Rylan straightened up, considering this. "Sounds like a good time for a vacation. Or a funeral," the creature added helpfully. With a nod, Rylan left the market, the weight of whatever was brewing on Earth settling on him like a particularly aggressive hangover. As he walked back to the Unreliable, he couldn't shake the feeling that this pilgrimage nonsense was going to upset the precarious balance of the galaxy. And when things got unbalanced, they tended to explode. Back aboard his ship, Rylan fired up the engines, listening to them rumble to life like an old man getting out of bed. He plotted a course for Earth, the only ball of rock insignificant enough to start the universe's next great war. "Captain, are we really going to Earth?" his first mate, Jackson, asked, popping his head in the cockpit. Jackson was the kind of optimistic fool who believed in happy endings, despite all evidence to the contrary. "Yep," Rylan replied, slamming the controls with a fist. "Time to see what sort of cult craziness our lovely little homeworld's gotten itself into." "Think we'll make it out alive?" Jackson asked, more out of curiosity than fear. "Define alive," Rylan said, grinning like a man who just remembered where he'd hidden his last bottle of whiskey. As the Unreliable hurtled toward Earth, Rylan couldn't help but reflect on humanity's knack for turning anything, even a dead planet, into a spectacle worth fighting over. It was both a curse and a charm, like a particularly ugly puppy that somehow still managed to get adopted. The stars streaked by, indifferent as ever to the petty dramas of human life, and Rylan settled into his seat, ready for whatever fresh hell awaited him on Earth. After all, if there was one thing he'd learned in his long career as a captain, it was that the universe loved a good joke, and humanity, in all its stubborn, ridiculous glory, was the punchline. The Unreliable groaned like a cantankerous old man as it skidded through the cosmos, engines coughing and wheezing. Captain Rylan Voss sat in the cockpit, his mind doing a tango with the chaos that awaited him on Earth. The ship's AI, a sarcastic piece of code that could rival Rylan in cynicism, piped up with a voice smoother than a politician's promise. "Captain, you've selected Earth as our destination. Shall I send a note to your next of kin?" "Very funny, tinny," Rylan muttered, rolling his eyes. "Just make sure we don't crash before we get there. I'd rather face the cultists than die of embarrassment." The stars blurred past, a cosmic light show for a journey that promised to be anything but entertaining. Jackson, ever the optimist, was busy making sure the ship didn't fall apart before it reached its destination. If there was one thing Rylan appreciated about Jackson, it was his ability to smile through the worst of situations, though Rylan often wondered if that was a sign of bravery or sheer stupidity. "Hey, Captain," Jackson called from the back, "got a message coming through. Says it's from a Tessa Quell." "You know her, Quell?" Rylan frowned. "That's not a name you forget easily." "Put her through." The holoscreen flickered to life with a clarity that betrayed the Unreliable's usual standards. It was like a dirty window had suddenly been wiped clean. Tessa Quell's face appeared, every bit as sharp and unapologetic as Rylan remembered. Her hair was tied back in a manner that suggested she'd been too busy saving the universe, or possibly dooming it, to bother with frivolities like grooming. "Rylan Voss," she greeted, her tone devoid of pleasantries. "Still flying that heap of scrap metal, I see, Tessa." Rylan grinned, his smile as crooked as a snake's handshake. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Or should I say the impending catastrophe?" she snorted, which Rylan took as a compliment. "I'm on Earth, and you're going to want to get here fast. Things are about to go from bad to worse. Are we talking end of the world worse or my last visit to the dentist worse?" Rylan quipped. "Both," she replied, somehow managing to sound both amused and exasperated. "There are factions here, cults, all after something buried on this rock. Ancient tech, Rylan. The kind that makes supernovas look like fireworks. They're planning to dig it up and play God." "Great," Rylan said, masking his concern with sarcasm, "because what the universe really needs is another power-hungry lunatic with a death ray." "Exactly. And those cultists are about as stable as a three-legged chair." "Sounds like my kind of party," he retorted. "What's in it for you, Tessa?" "You're not exactly a save-the-world type." She shrugged with a nonchalance that was almost convincing. "Just doing my civic duty. Besides, if those maniacs get what they want, there won't be a world left to scam. And I've got a retirement plan to think about." "Fair enough," Rylan chuckled. "We'll be there soon. Say hi to my impending doom for me." She cut the connection with a smirk, her image dissolving back into static. Rylan leaned back, his mind racing faster than the ship. "Looks like we've got a date with destiny," Captain Jackson said, trying but failing to keep the apprehension out of his voice. "More like a blind date with a particularly angry Wolverine," Rylan replied. "But hey, what's life without a little risk? Peaceful," Jackson suggested. "Boring," Rylan corrected. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his body and heading toward the ship's minuscule galley. "Better fuel up before we hit the fan." The trip to Earth was uneventful in the way that made Rylan suspicious. Space travel was never simple. If something wasn't exploding or malfunctioning, it was probably plotting behind your back. But soon enough, a dirty, blue-green marble loomed in the viewport, dotted with satellites and debris, a little piece of cosmic history caught in the gravitational web. Rylan coaxed the unreliable into orbit, looking for a place to land without getting shot down by overzealous cultists or the half-baked planetary defenses still functioning. He spotted a clearing that looked only moderately suicidal and brought the ship down with all the grace of a drunk trying to walk a straight line. As the engines powered down, Rylan and Jackson suited up, their gear a motley collection of armor, patches, and hopes for survival. The airlock hissed open, and they stepped out into the twilight gloom of Earth's surface. "Charming," Rylan muttered, surveying the landscape. "Looks like someone forgot to pay their landscaping bill." Tessa was waiting for them, leaning against a tree with an ease that suggested she wasn't currently being hunted by multiple fanatical factions. "Took you long enough." "Traffic was murder," Rylan said, nodding toward the jungle of rusting metal and overgrown vegetation. "So, where do we start?" "Follow me," she said, pushing off from the tree and leading them through the ruins of what was once a city. The streets were cracked and broken, nature slowly reclaiming what humanity had abandoned in its quest to ruin other parts of the galaxy. As they walked, Tessa filled them in on the various cults. Each group thinks they have the right to Earth's legacy. The Order of the Phoenix, no relation to the mythical bird, and the Starborn Fellowship are the big players. Then there are the smaller, crazier ones, like the descendants of Gaia, who think the apocalypse will somehow bring them enlightenment. "Enlightenment or a swift kick in the head," Jackson said, looking around nervously at the shadows. "Same difference," Rylan muttered. "So what's this ancient tech they are all after?" Tessa stopped, her expression serious. "The records call it the core, a power source, weapon, or something else entirely. It's buried deep and they're getting close to finding it. If they get their hands on it, the best-case scenario is we all go back to throwing rocks at each other, and the worst case?" Jackson asked, though he probably already knew the answer. Rylan chuckled darkly. "The universe gets a front-row seat to our self-destruction. After all, nothing quite says progress like a good old-fashioned obliteration." Tessa nodded. "We need to stop them. I've got contacts, people who aren't keen on letting a bunch of lunatics blow everything to hell. We just need a plan." "Plans are overrated," Rylan said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "But I'm guessing you have one." "Of course," Tessa replied, her confidence as solid as a neutron star. "First, we gather intel. Then we sabotage their operations. Finally, we make sure the core stays buried and forgotten." "Sounds risky," Jackson said, scratching his head. "But I guess we didn't come all this way for the weather." Tessa smirked. "Stick with me. We might just make it out alive." They made their way through the city, dodging patrols and avoiding traps set by the various factions. The place was a war zone of ideologies, each group convinced they alone held the key to salvation, or at least to the biggest stick in the sandbox. As they reached a vantage point overlooking the cult's encampments, Rylan couldn't help but shake his head at the sheer absurdity of it all. "You know, for a bunch of folks who claim to want peace, they sure have a funny way of showing it. That's humanity for you," Tessa replied. "Always willing to kill for a good cause, or a terrible one," Jackson added. They observed as the cultists went about their activities with the fervor of ants on a mission, oblivious to the destruction they were courting. Tessa pointed to a large structure at the center of the chaos. That's their main dig site. We need to get in there if we're going to stop this madness. Any idea how? Rylan asked, pulling out a pair of binoculars to get a better look. Yeah, Tessa said, her voice laced with determination. We're going to play one group off against the other. Start a little chaos of our own. You mean ignite a powder keg? Jackson asked. Exactly, she grinned. And then we'll see who's left standing to deal with. As they hashed out the details, Rylan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement. Sure, they were about to dive headfirst into a situation that could end with them becoming a footnote in some future historian's book. But if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that life was too short to play it safe. All right, Rylan said, clapping his hands together. Let's go throw a wrench into this mess and see what happens. With their plan set, they made their way into the heart of the cultists' territory, ready to sow discord among the factions. In the end, it wouldn't matter who won or lost, as long as the core remained buried and Earth could continue its slow, inevitable decay in peace. As they moved forward, Rylan felt a familiar thrill. It was the kind of day that made him glad to be alive, even if it was just to see how gloriously everything could go wrong. After all, if there was one thing he knew, it was that nothing good ever came easy, especially not in a universe as beautifully broken as this one. The Unreliable's interior was as charming as a hangover on a Monday morning. Half the lights flickered like they were uncertain about their own existence, and the air smelled faintly of yesterday's desperation. Rylan Voss leaned over the holoscreen, his mind too busy juggling plans to notice the odd smell of burnt wires. Tessa stood next to him, her sharp eyes scanning a map of Earth's surface as though it might reveal a secret passage out of their current mess. Tinny, patch me through to the Interstellar Council, Rylan ordered, his voice as crisp as a burnt tostada. Are you sure, Captain? Tinny's smooth voice echoed through the cabin. They're not exactly your fan club unless you're talking about the kind that comes with pitchforks and torches. Just do it, Tinny, Rylan snapped, feeling the familiar knot of frustration tightening in his chest. The holoscreen blinked and the council's emblem, two planets doing a rather pretentious dance, materialized, only to be overshadowed by the stern face of Counselor Varl. His expression was that of a man who'd just bitten into a sandwich and found it filled with disappointment. Captain Voss, Varl said, his tone as warm as an ice moon. To what do we owe this unexpected intrusion? Counselor Varl, always a pleasure, Rylan replied, flashing a grin that could cut glass. I'm here to talk about the potential apocalypse brewing on Earth. Figured it might interest you. Varl sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested he kept a stock of them just for conversations with Rylan. What cataclysm are you babbling about this time, Voss? The kind that involves a fanatical cult leader named Ardek, digging up ancient tech that could turn our universe into a smoking crater, Tessa interjected, cutting to the chase. Varl's expression didn't change, but the spark of interest in his eyes suggested he was at least partially listening. And you have proof of this proof? Rylan echoed, scratching his chin. How about the fact that my ship managed to land on Earth without being vaporized? Feels proofy enough to me. Captain Voss, the Council doesn't operate on gut feelings and sarcasm, Varl replied, the corners of his mouth twitching like they wanted to smile but were afraid of what might happen if they did. Then it's a miracle you've gotten anything done, Rylan retorted. Look, Varl, we're not asking for you to send the cavalry. Just a few eyes on the ground to verify our claims, or lend us a few ceremonial weapons to hurl at the maniacal cultists, Tessa added, with a smile that promised nothing but trouble. Varl considered this, his fingers steepled under his chin like a cartoon villain at a board meeting. Very well, I'll dispatch a reconnaissance team. But Voss, you'd better pray this isn't another one of your wild goose chases. Praying's not really my thing, but I'll keep my fingers crossed, Rylan replied. Thanks, Varl. The holoscreen faded to black, leaving the two of them to the quiet hum of the ship's strained engines. Think you'll actually send help? Jackson asked, poking his head through the doorway like a curious meerkat. Depends, Rylan said, leaning back in his chair. on whether his faith in humanity outweighs his faith in bureaucratic red tape. You're an optimist, Captain. I'll give you that, Tessa said, shaking her head. Someone's got to be right. Rylan replied with a wry smile. Their conversation was cut short by the abrupt arrival of Grogger, who slipped into the room with the stealth of a hippo in a tutu. He was supposed to be their contact, but he had all the coherence of a drunken sailor trying to navigate a maze. Rylan, Grogger began, his voice somewhere between a whisper and a belch, "We've got trouble. Really? Because everything's been going so smoothly," Rylan drawled, rolling his eyes. "There's someone on board," Grogger continued, looking around as though expecting someone to leap out of the shadows. "Someone who doesn't belong. Fantastic," Rylan muttered. "And here I thought I'd just misplaced my marbles." They followed Grogger through the dimly lit corridors of the Unreliable, alert for any sign of an intruder. It wasn't long before they reached the cargo bay, where a lone figure was hunched over, examining one of the ship's panels with the curiosity of a cat poking a hornet's nest. "Hey," Rylan shouted, reaching for his sidearm. "Step away from that panel unless you want a free trip to the afterlife." The figure turned, revealing a young man with slicked back hair and a grin that suggested he was either insane or very, very confident. "Captain Voss, I presume? I was wondering when we'd meet, and you are?" Rylan asked, keeping his weapon trained on the stranger. "Call me Ardek," the man replied, his voice smooth as silk. "I think you and I have a lot to discuss." "Well, two can play at that game," Rylan said, not lowering his weapon. "I think you and I have nothing to discuss." "Oh, but we do," Ardek insisted, taking a step forward. "You see, you've become quite the nuisance in my plans. Your interference is unwelcome. Join the club," Tessa said, stepping up beside Rylan. "We're quite popular with people who like to shoot first and ask questions later." Ardek chuckled, the sound unnervingly pleasant. "You're meddling in matters beyond your understanding. The core isn't yours to protect. It's destined for something greater, like making sure every living being gets an early retirement." Jackson quipped, his grip tightening on his own weapon. Ardek's smile didn't waver. "You're blind, all of you. The core will bring about a new era, one where petty squabbles and misunderstandings are erased." "Sounds like a real utopia," Rylan said dryly. "Shame you'll be the only one left to enjoy it." "The universe is full of necessary sacrifices," Ardek replied as if quoting scripture. "But I'm here to offer you a choice. Walk away and you'll be spared. Stay and—" "Well, let's not ruin the surprise." "Generous offer," Rylan replied, his sarcasm as thick as molasses. "But I think I'll pass," Ardek shrugged, unfazed. "As you wish. Just remember, Captain, when the end comes it'll be swift and unavoidable." With that ominous farewell, Ardek pressed a button on a small device clipped to his belt. There was a flash of light and then he was gone, leaving them blinking in the sudden darkness. "Teleportation," Tessa growled. "That's just great. Adds a certain flair to his villainy," Rylan admitted, holstering his weapon. "But it confirms one thing, we're on the right track. He wouldn't have bothered with us if we weren't. We need to move quickly," Tessa said, urgency lacing her voice. "If Ardek's willing to show his hand, things are further along than we thought. Tinny, can you track where he went?" Rylan asked, glancing up at the ceiling as though the AI might be hiding there. "Sorry, Captain," Tinny replied, a hint of regret in his tone. "His tech is beyond anything we have on board. A teleport like that is a one-way ticket with no return address." "Typical," Rylan muttered. "All right, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a deadline." They regrouped, huddling around a table cluttered with maps and data pads. Tessa outlined her plan, tapping a finger on the map with each point. "We need to get to the core's location before Ardek can reach it. From what we know, it's deep underground, beneath the central dig site. If we can sabotage their efforts or seal off the entrances, we might be able to buy some time." "What about the other cults?" Jackson asked. "Won't they be gunning for us too? They are Ardek's backup dancers," Rylan said with a dismissive wave. "We deal with the head honcho and the rest will scatter like pigeons." Tessa nodded. "Right. We'll need to cause enough confusion to keep them busy while we make our move." Sounds like we're going to need a little help from our friends, Rylan mused, fingers drumming on the table. Grogger, can you rustle up some of your contacts? People who aren't keen on being part of Ardek's post-apocalyptic dream. Grogger nodded, his usual bumbling demeanor replaced by a rare focus. I'll see who I can find. But it won't be easy. Most folks aren't keen on tangling with a man who thinks annihilation is a lifestyle choice. Just do your best, Ryland said. We don't need an army, just enough chaos to keep Ardek guessing. As Grogger shuffled off, Ryland turned to the others. All right, gather what you need and get ready. We move at first light. With a plan in place and a deadline looming over their heads like a guillotine, they dispersed to prepare. Ryland found himself staring out the viewport at Earth's surface, the night sky a patchwork of stars and shadows. Nothing like a bit of impending doom to keep things interesting, he muttered to himself. Let's just hope we're still around to see how it all unfolds. As he stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something monumental. It wasn't just about stopping Ardek or keeping the core from falling into the wrong hands. It was about proving that even in a universe as dark and chaotic as theirs, there was still room for a little light, a little hope, and maybe even a little redemption. Here's to the fools who dream, Rylan whispered, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. May we live long enough to see another sunrise. The interplanetary highway was a mess, which was saying something, considering it was usually a floating junkyard masquerading as a travel route. The cults had decided subtlety was for losers and began spreading their influence like a bad rash. Every other signal that blipped across the Unreliable's comms was a disturbing hymn or a recruitment ad for Ardek's cosmic retirement plan. Captain Rylan Voss, never one to miss an opportunity to curse his luck, was in the cockpit, hands on the wheel, and a scowl deep enough to plant potatoes and etched across his face. I swear, if I hear one more sermon about the new era of peace through complete annihilation, I'm going to jettison myself into the sun. Tessa Quell, seated beside him, offered a dry laugh. You'd think these cultists would have invested in a marketing department. Join us or die doesn't seem to have the right ring to it. Hey, it worked for the ancient Romans, Jackson chimed in from the back, tinkering with a panel that looked like it hadn't met a screwdriver in a decade. Or was it pay taxes or die? Same difference, really. Grogger's contacts are as useful as a solar-powered flashlight in a black hole, Rylan grumbled, scanning the horizon of stars for any sign of incoming trouble. We need something big and stupid to get these cultists off our tails, like a plan, Tessa asked, with a dangerously raised eyebrow. Exactly like a plan, Rylan agreed. But let's make sure it's as reckless as possible. Wouldn't want anyone accusing us of competence. Jackson wiped grease from his hands with a rag that looked like it had seen better centuries. You know, Captain, if we could somehow scramble their frequencies, we might buy ourselves some breathing room. Rylan gave him a sideways look, 1 part admiration and 2 parts disbelief. You're saying we should throw a cosmic monkey wrench in their broadcasting? Pretty much, yeah, Jackson said, shrugging. If we can overload their signals, it'll be like trying to sing in a hurricane. No one's going to hear them. Smart thinking, Tessa said, genuinely impressed. And here I thought you were just the ship's designated optimist. I multitask, Jackson replied, grinning. Rylan leaned back in his seat, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. All right, let's see if we can pull this off without blowing ourselves up. Again, Tinny, what's the status on the comm array? Tessa called out, glancing up at the ceiling where the AI presumably resided in digital serenity. Currently functioning at 43% efficiency, Tinny replied with all the pep of a funeral director. Though I'd recommend against any attempt to improve it, Captain, noted, Rylan said, rolling his eyes. Jackson, can you work your magic with enough duct tape? Anything's possible, Jackson said, already moving toward the access panel. All right, while Jackson plays tech wizard, Tessa and I will come up with a distraction that'll make Ardek's head spin, Rylan decided, cracking his knuckles like a man assuring himself he was still in control of something. Distractions are my specialty, Tessa bragged, already brainstorming. What if we mock up a fake artifact? Something they can't resist chasing, like a cosmic carrot on a stick, Ryland said, his grin widening. Exactly, she nodded, her mind working overtime. We could rig a beacon, make it look like the core itself is somewhere else entirely. And when they go running after it, Ryland continued, picking up the thread, we swoop in and do what we do best, which is what exactly? Tessa asked with a smirk. Cause trouble, Ryland replied, relishing the idea. Jackson's voice floated back to them, muffled by the sounds of his work. I've got the signal booster almost ready. Just need to rig it to the backup power supply. We've got a plan half-baked as it is, Ryland announced, feeling a surge of determination. Let's get to it before something else goes wrong. They set to work, each playing their part in the chaotic ballet of preparations. Ryland and Tessa pored over maps and schematics, plotting a course for the dummy artifact's location. Meanwhile, Jackson worked tirelessly, his hands moving with the kind of precision that only a desperate man can muster. Think this'll work? Tessa asked, casting a skeptical eye over the plan. It's either this or join Ardek's club, Ryland replied with a shrug. And I've never been a fan of membership fees. The Unreliable shuddered beneath them, as though sharing in their trepidation. Tinny's voice crackled through the speakers again, dry as ever. Captain, I should remind you that tampering with ship systems in this manner is likely to void any remaining warranties. Warranties are for cowards, Tinny, Ryland said, grinning despite himself. We're living on borrowed time anyway. The ship lurched forward as Ryland steered them toward the coordinates they'd chosen for their fake beacon. Tessa was at the helm of the operation, setting up the beacon with a deftness that spoke to her many years of finding loopholes and loopholes within those loopholes. The finished product was a small device, unobtrusive but potent, ready to send out a pulse that would have every cultist within a light year drooling over imagined treasures. Beacon is ready, Tessa announced, holding it up like a trophy. Perfect, Ryland said, eyeing it appreciatively. Let's give these space zealots a wild goose chase they'll never forget. Jackson finished up with the comm array, wiping sweat from his brow. Signals boosted and ready to go. We'll be broadcasting a big, fat look over there in no time. Time to see how gullible these fanatics really are, Tessa said, setting the beacon to activate. Let's make some noise, Ryland agreed, flicking a switch that sent the beacon's signal screaming into the void. Within moments, the effect was palpable. The cult's comms were awash with confusion and static, their carefully orchestrated messages drowned in a sea of interference. Looks like they took the bait, Jackson said, listening to the chaos spilling through the speakers. They're chasing ghosts now. Never underestimate the power of a well-placed distraction, Ryland said, satisfaction evident in his voice. The Unreliable sailed through the chaos, slipping past the disrupted cult ships like a shadow through the night. With the cultists chasing phantom signals, the path to the dig site was clear. All right, let's move before they catch on, Ryland commanded, his eyes fixed on the prize ahead. Tessa nodded, a determined glint in her eye. We'll show Ardek and his cronies that they're not the only ones who can play dirty. The ship descended toward Earth, the crew steeling themselves for whatever lay ahead. Ryland felt a strange sense of calm settle over him, the kind that only comes when you know you've done all you can and the rest is up to fate. Here's to reckless plans, he murmured, fingers drumming on the console. And hoping we're not the ones left holding the bag. As they broke through the atmosphere, the dig site loomed large on the horizon, a scar on the earth that promised ancient secrets and untold dangers. The stage was set, the players in position. Now all they needed was the right moment to strike. We're in the thick of it now, Jackson said, checking the sensors. No turning back. Wouldn't dream of it, Ryland replied, a fierce grin splitting his face. Let's go make some history. With a final nod of agreement, the Unreliable dove toward the dig site, ready to confront whatever the cults threw their way. It was do or die, but if there was one thing they were good at, It was making the impossible seem merely improbable. And so they flew, fueled by a mix of desperation, resolve, and just a dash of insanity. They weren't heroes, not by a long shot. Just a ragtag crew trying to stop their universe from going up in flames. But hey, as Rylan always said, you've got to start somewhere. With the beacon set and the cultists scrambling after phantom dreams, the Unreliable's crew found themselves with a rare commodity: time. Of course, this being them, the victory was about as stable as a star in its death throes. Captain Rylan Voss wasn't about to let a little thing like temporary success go to his head. No, he was pretty sure the universe would find some fresh hell to throw their way. Yeah, we pulled the wool over their eyes, Rylan mused, leaning back in his seat. But I'm expecting a cosmic boot to the face any second now. Oh, come on, Voss, Tessa chimed in with her signature smirk. Embrace the moment. You know, while it lasts a whole 5 minutes. Jackson, never one to miss a chance for sarcasm, piped up from his spot by the comms. 5 minutes. You're optimistic today, or delusional, Tinny added, because there was no universe in which the ship's AI wouldn't take a jab when the chance arose. They exchanged looks, knowing full well that the next punchline would likely come with actual punches. The Interstellar Council, the cultists, and their own dwindling supplies, any of them could be the next issue to land a nasty blow. It was then like clockwork that their laughter was cut short. The comms crackled ominously, a sound that meant only one thing: bad news. Counselor Varl's voice, stern and dripping with suspicion, filled the cockpit. Captain Voss, Varl began, his tone as warm as a glacier's heart. I'm sure you're aware that Solstice Junction has fallen under Ardek's control. Your escapades have not gone unnoticed, and we now face a complete blackout of communications. Care to explain? Rylan ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the universe settling back onto his shoulders. Well, that's new, he muttered, shooting a glance at Tessa, whose face had morphed from lightly amused to deadpan serious. Counselor Varl, I'd love to explain, Rylan replied, every word laced with sarcasm. But we're a bit preoccupied with trying not to die out here, so if you don't mind. Varl's holographic face remained as unimpressed as ever. Your actions have compromised the entire sector, Captain. Compromised, Rylan echoed, testing the word like a bad drink. I'd say we spice things up, Jackson snorted. That's one way to dodge responsibility, Cap. Shut it, Jax, Rylan snapped, though there wasn't much venom in it. We had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, damn it. Varl's voice cut through their bickering. Your plan has left us in a precarious position. We can't establish contact with any allied ships or stations. Well, that's a pickle, Tessa said, pulling up a map that was more red lights than clear paths. So much for backup. I never liked relying on backup anyway, Rylan grumbled. Always thought of them as Plan B. Or C. Technically, we've run out of the alphabet, Tinny interjected. So perhaps improvisation is in order. Rylan sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like gravity gone mad. What do we have left, people? Not much, Jackson muttered, glancing at his readouts. Our fuel's low, supplies are dwindling, and the comms are as good as fried. We're flying blind and broke, Tessa added, scanning their resources. Even Grogger's contacts aren't this useless. Grogger's contacts couldn't find their own asses with 2 hands and a flashlight, Rylan said, shaking his head. All right, let's focus. We need to find a way to punch through Ardek's interference and get the hell out of this mess. And how do you propose we do that? Varl's hologram questioned, eyebrows almost reaching for his non-existent hairline. You're in a worse position than when you started. Hope for a miracle. Jackson suggested, though his tone was anything but hopeful. Miracles are overrated, Rylan said, rubbing his chin as he thought. We need something tangible, like a way to bypass Ardek's control over Solstice Junction, Tessa suggested. If we can hijack his signal, we might be able to get a message out. That's a big might, Rylan pointed out, though he was already warming to the idea. But it's better than sitting here with our thumbs up. We get it, Tessa interrupted, rolling her eyes. Let's figure out how to make it happen. They set to work, their earlier camaraderie replaced by the grim determination of people with their backs against the wall. Rylan knew they were walking a razor-thin line between disaster and survival, but as he saw it, they'd walked it so many times it was practically a dance floor. "Jackson, what do we have that can boost our signal?" Rylan asked, scanning their makeshift arsenal of parts and tech. "Not much," Jackson replied, rummaging through a box of odds and ends. "But if I reroute power from non-essential systems, maybe we can squeeze out enough oomph to cut through the interference." "Non-essential, huh?" Rylan mused, glancing towards the flickering lights that gave the unreliable its charm. "So everything, pretty much," Jackson grinned, already pulling cables and reconnecting them in a way that would either work brilliantly or blow up in their faces. "Tinny, keep us posted on any changes in Ardek's signals," Tessa ordered, her focus never wavering from the screens. "As you wish, though it's like watching paint dry," Tinny replied, adding an exaggerated yawn for effect. "Stay positive, Tinny," Rylan said, his grin returning despite everything. "If this doesn't work, maybe Ardek needs a new AI to push his propaganda." "I'll pass, Captain," Tinny replied coolly. "My circuits are allergic to fanaticism." "Everyone's a critic," Rylan muttered, but there was no hiding the affection in his voice. For hours they worked, the hum of the ship providing a backdrop to their frenetic activity. Every glance exchange spoke of shared history and a stubborn refusal to be beaten by the odds. They had no choice but to keep pushing forward. Time slipped away, and the meager resources they had left felt like sand running through their fingers. The specter of failure loomed large, as did the nagging realization that they might have bitten off more than they could chew. But when had that ever stopped them before? "All right, moment of truth," Jackson said, wiping his hands on his pants. "We're as ready as we'll ever be." "Good, because we've got company," Tessa warned, pointing to the radar where blips were converging on their location. "Seems Ardek's getting wise to our games." "Of course he is," Rylan muttered. "Wouldn't be sporting if he didn't." "Do we make a run for it?" Jackson asked, already anticipating the answer. "Not yet," Rylan said, his voice steady. "We need to open a channel and get a message out before we're boxed in." "Then let's make it quick," Tessa said, her fingers flying over the controls. They activated the makeshift booster, and for a moment everything seemed to hold its breath. The interference was thick, like trying to cut through space mud, but slowly, steadily, they pushed a signal through. "This is Captain Rylan Voss aboard the Unreliable." Rylan spoke into the mic, his voice carrying the weight of their plight. "We're facing a total communications blackout. If any allies can hear this, we need support at Solstice Junction." The waiting was hell, the silence stretching out like a taut wire ready to snap. Seconds felt like hours as they watched the radar, hopeful for a miracle. Finally, a crackle of response broke the tension. "Captain Voss, this is the freighter Reckless Abandon. Received your signal and are en route to assist." "Hold tight." Rylan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Reckless Abandon, you're a sight for sore sensors." "Don't thank us yet," the voice replied, tinged with equal parts humor and caution. "We've got our own issues, but we'll do what we can." "Understood," Rylan said, glancing at his crew. "See you soon." He cut the transmission, feeling a renewed sense of hope, fragile as it was. "All right, folks, let's keep it together until help arrives." The blips on the radar grew closer, the cult's ships relentless in their pursuit. The Unreliable's chances were slimmer than a starved needle, but they weren't out yet. "Looks like we've got company," Tessa said, her voice steady as the cult ships closed in. "And we've got one hell of a welcome party planned," Jackson added, his grin wide and wild. "Here's to reckless plans," Rylan said, echoing his earlier sentiment. "And hoping we're not the ones left holding the bag." As the Unreliable braced for the incoming storm, Rylan couldn't help but smile. They'd never taken the easy road, but that was just fine with him. After all, if they couldn't beat the odds, they'd at least give them one hell of a fight. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The cockpit was buzzing like a broken neon sign, and just as useful. Ryland sat in the captain's chair, tapping one foot against the metal floor in a jittery rhythm, his eyes darting between the various displays that seemed intent on showing nothing but bad news. Around him, the crew moved with the kind of tense energy you might find in a bar brawl, everyone ready for action, no one quite sure who'd be left standing when the dust settled. "All right, folks," Ryland said, dragging their attention back from whatever dark corners of their minds they'd wandered into. "We've got a plan, or at least the shadow of one. Time to turn this mess into something resembling a victory." Tessa glanced up from her console, eyebrows raised. "You sure that isn't just the shadow of despair? Same difference," Ryland replied with a grin that was more teeth than joy. "But here's the thing. I think I've got a way to throw a wrench in Ardic's gears." "Oh boy, do tell," Jackson said, leaning back in his chair with the kind of exaggerated interest usually reserved for bad soap operas. "Remember that old Earth map we scanned?" Ryland asked, fingers flying over his holoscreen. "Turns out Ardic and his merry band of zealots are a little too into ancient Earth mythology. They think the planet holds the key to their so-called enlightenment." "Enlightenment?" Tinny chimed in, her voice dripping with digital skepticism. "Is that before or after they brainwash everyone?" "During, probably," Ryland replied, dismissing the AI sarcasm with a wave. "The point is, they've been trying to crack ancient languages and symbols, thinking it'll give them some kind of cosmic leg up." "That's rich," Tessa said, a half-laugh sneaking into her voice. "People are just big kids, aren't they? Always looking for cheat codes to life." "Exactly," Ryland continued. "And that's where we come in. We throw them a bone, something shiny to chase. Use their own fanaticism against them." "So what's the bait?" Jackson asked, scratching his chin as if the answer might be hiding there. "An ancient message," Ryland said, pulling up a translation they'd pieced together ages ago, tucked away and forgotten. "We broadcast it. Make it look like a beacon from Earth. They'll eat it up, get distracted." "Isn't that, lying?" Tessa asked, but her smirk showed she was already sold on the idea. "Deceptive truth," Ryland corrected. "We're not selling them paradise, just a shiny path to nowhere." "Sounds like politics," Jackson muttered. "Or religion," Tinny added helpfully. "Great, now we're con artists," Tessa said, shaking her head but unable to hide her amusement. "My mother would be proud. Good thing we're not in this for the accolades," Ryland said, tapping the holoscreen to bring up the necessary files. "Now, let's get this train wreck rolling. Tessa, help me with the broadcast. Jackson, keep an eye out for any cult ships getting too curious. Tinny, track Ardic's communications. Let's see if we can't make them outsmart themselves." "On it," they replied, the atmosphere in the cockpit shifting from grim to something approximating optimistic desperation. Like a gambler on his last chip, they were all in. With everyone focused on their tasks, the cockpit fell into a tense silence broken only by the occasional beep or static crackle. Ryland and Tessa worked in tandem, shaping the message, wrapping it in just enough mystery and allure to draw the cultists like moths to a flame. It was the kind of trickery that would have made any old Earth con artist nod in appreciation. "Ready to hit send?" Tessa asked, her fingers hovering over the console. "Let's give them something to believe in," Ryland replied, sending a silent prayer to whatever cosmic forces were listening. "Not for salvation, mind you, just a bit of luck." The message went out and they waited, the seconds dragging like a slow death. The cult ships on the radar hesitated, a falter in their relentless approach. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Looks like they've taken the bait," Jackson said, his voice carrying a cautious optimism. "They're diverting some of their ships. Keep your eyes peeled," Ryland warned. "We can't get too comfortable. Comfort went out the airlock ages ago," Tessa muttered, her eyes glued to the screens. Minutes ticked by, each one a minor victory as the cult's attention shifted. The Unreliable was still careening through the void, but now with a sliver of hope that hadn't been there before. "Reckless abandons on the horizon," Tinny announced, her tone surprisingly upbeat. "Looks like they brought friends." Sure enough, the radar lit up with new signatures, ships that weren't hostile for once. Their window of escape was opening, and Rylan wasn't about to let it slam shut. "All right, people," Rylan said, rising to his feet as if the gesture could ward off disaster. "We've got an opening. Reckless Abandon and their buddies are moving in to cover us. Let's not screw this up." "That's the spirit, Cap," Jackson said, though his grin was tempered by the reality of their situation. The cultists wouldn't stay distracted forever, and they all knew it. The Unreliable lurched forward, engines straining as they made a break for it. The hum of the ship grew to a roar, vibrating through the metal frame like a heartbeat, pushing them toward the promise of survival. "Reckless Abandon, we're making our move," Rylan called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Appreciate the assist. Copy that, Unreliable," came the reply, crackling over the comms. "We'll keep the cultists busy. Just don't take any scenic detours." "Wouldn't dream of it," Rylan said, unable to keep the smirk from his face. "We're in enough trouble as it is." As they pushed forward, the stars blurring outside the viewport, Rylan couldn't help but think about the absurdity of it all. A band of misfits using an ancient Earth myth to outsmart a cult hell-bent on interstellar domination. If anyone wrote this down, they'd call it fiction too ridiculous to believe. But here they were, living it. "Tinny, keep a line open to Reckless Abandon," Rylan ordered, eyes flicking between the radar and the viewport. "I want to know the second anything changes." "Yes, Captain," Tinny replied, the AI tone clipped and professional, a stark contrast to her usual sarcasm. "Jax, keep us steady." "We're not out of the woods yet," Rylan said, trusting his crew to keep the ship in one piece. "Woods?" Jackson asked, one eyebrow raised. "I think we left those light years back." "Figure of speech," Rylan shot back, though he couldn't quite hide his grin. "Just keep us moving." With every passing moment, they gained ground, pushing further from the cultists and closer to the ragtag fleet that promised salvation. The tension in the cockpit remained high, everyone acutely aware that one wrong move could spell disaster. "Captain, the cultists are regrouping," Tinny warned, her voice cutting through the noise. "They're on our tail." "Figures they wouldn't stay distracted for long," Rylan muttered, glancing at Tessa. "Suggestions, pray they're dumber than they look," she offered, though the humor was strained. "After that?" Rylan pressed. "Let's hope Reckless Abandon has a few tricks left," she replied, turning her attention back to the controls. "Or at least a willingness to play decoy." The ships from Reckless Abandon surged to meet them, forming a protective screen that kept the cultists at bay. It was a rough shield, but better than nothing. "We're almost clear," Jackson said, his voice tight with concentration. "Almost doesn't cut it," Rylan replied. "Keep pushing." With Reckless Abandon and their allies running interference, they managed to slip past the cultist fleet, the distance between them growing until the radar showed only friendly blips in their vicinity. "Looks like we made it," Tessa said, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. "For now," Rylan agreed, though he couldn't deny the satisfaction of having pulled off the impossible yet again. "Unreliable, this is Reckless Abandon," the comms crackled. "We're out of the fire, but we'll need to regroup before they come back." "Understood, Reckless," Rylan replied, slumping back into his chair, exhaustion setting in like a lead weight. "Thanks for the save. Drinks are on us next time we cross paths. Just make sure they're not synthetic," came the reply, a chuckle audible even through the static. "We'll rendezvous at the coordinates we're sending. Should be safe there for the time being." Rylan nodded, grateful for the support and the momentary respite. "Copy that. We'll see you there." As the transmission faded, the crew of the Unreliable allowed themselves a moment to breathe. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. They'd managed to outwit the cult, if only temporarily, and live to tell about it. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," Jackson said, stretching as if he hadn't just narrowly avoided death. "Not bad at all," Rylan agreed, though he knew the fight wasn't over. Ardek and his cult would regroup, and the Interstellar Council's disdain wouldn't disappear overnight. Still, for the first time in what felt like ages, they had a chance. A chance to fight back, to turn the tide, and maybe, just maybe, walk away from this nightmare with their skins intact. As the stars spun around them, the crew settled into their new course, a sense of camaraderie binding them tighter than any alliance born of necessity. They were in this together, for better or worse, and if they had anything to say about it, the universe was in for one hell of a surprise. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was making the impossible just another day at the office. The Interstellar Council had a knack for making Ryland's life hell. Of course, considering his track record, he was practically begging for it. But here they were, hurtling toward Earth with a plan that was shakier than a politician's promise. Reckless Abandon's crew had peeled off, leaving the Unreliable to its own devices, which was akin to leaving a toddler in charge of a nuclear reactor. "Why do I get the feeling we're about to win a Darwin Award?" Jackson quipped, his eyes fixed on the endless expanse ahead. "Because we probably are," Ryland shot back, not taking his eyes off the controls. "But if you've got a better idea, I'm all ears. Anyone have a map to sanity?" Tessa chimed in, flicking switches with the kind of nonchalance only a seasoned survivor could muster. "I seem to have misplaced mine." Ryland grinned despite himself. It was the gallows humor that kept them sane, or at least as close to it as possible in this line of work. "We're headed to Earth, folks. Let's see if we can dig up something the cultists haven't yet ruined. Assuming they haven't planted flags and declared it sacred ground," Tinny added, her holographic form glimmering like a sarcastic ghost. The Unreliable's engines rumbled with the enthusiasm of a sloth on sedatives, but the old girl was holding together for now. Ryland wasn't much for prayer, but he figured it couldn't hurt to plead with the universe. Just let them reach Earth in one piece. "Why does it always come down to Earth?" Jackson asked, fiddling with a console that looked like it had seen better centuries. "You'd think the galaxy would have moved on by now." "Because humans are nostalgic idiots," Tessa replied dryly. "And if anyone's going to screw up the past, it might as well be us." "True," Ryland agreed, adjusting their course. "Besides, if we're going to get slaughtered, I'd prefer it to be somewhere scenic." As Earth loomed ever larger on the viewscreen, the crew fell into a tense quiet. Each of them lost in their thoughts, no doubt contemplating the insanity of their current trajectory. The planet beckoned with the promise of both salvation and disaster, a fitting metaphor for humanity if ever there was one. "Captain, I'm picking up some chatter on the cult's frequencies," Tinny reported, her tone dismissive, as if she half expected them to be discussing the latest galactic fashion trends. "They're onto something, but it's garbled, probably trying to decrypt the ancient message we sent," Ryland said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Let's hope it keeps them busy, or drives them mad," Tessa suggested. "A little insanity goes a long way," Jackson chuckled. "In that case, we're already ahead of the curve." The atmosphere within the Unreliable was a strange cocktail of fear, hope, and the kind of reckless optimism only the truly desperate could muster. They were flying headlong into potential oblivion, but hey, at least they had front-row seats to the spectacle. Entering Earth's orbit, Ryland announced, his eyes scanning the data. "Let's see what the old girl's got left. Hopefully more than we do," Tessa muttered, though her fingers danced over the controls with practiced ease. Earth sprawled beneath them, a patchwork of greens, blues, and the occasional ominous brown. Whatever secrets it held, they had precious little time to find them before the cultists caught on. "Tinny, any signs of welcoming parties?" Ryland asked, half expecting a flotilla of cult ships to pop up out of nowhere. "Negative," Tinny said. "Looks like we've got some breathing room." "For now." "Good," Ryland said, already formulating the next steps. "Tessa, check the databases. See if any of those ancient sites the cultists are after are still intact." "We might find something useful on it," Tessa replied, tapping away at her console with the focus of a cat stalking prey. "Jackson, keep an eye on the radar. I want to know the second anything fishy appears." Jackson gave a mock salute. "Don't worry, Cap. I've got my eyes peeled like a banana. Let's hope we don't slip on the peel," Ryland quipped, though the humor was forced. They all knew what was at stake. Minutes turned into hours as they scoured the surface, searching for any clue, any sign of the mythical technology that could give them the upper hand. Rylan knew it was a long shot, but at this point, long shots were all they had. "Found something," Tessa said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "An old signal bouncing around like a pinball. It's got the same signature as the message we sent. Could be a trap," Jackson warned, ever the skeptic. "Or it could be exactly what we need," Rylan countered, eyes alight with the possibility of hope. "Let's check it out." The signal led them to a remote region, somewhere between desolate and why did we even bother. But there, nestled amidst the ruins, was a structure that looked suspiciously intact. "Looks like a bunker," Tessa observed, her voice flat but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Great, an ancient hidey hole. Let's hope it's not full of angry ghosts," Jackson joked, though his hand hovered near his blaster. "Wouldn't that be a twist," Rylan said, though he was already prepping for potential landing. "Tinny, get us close but keep us ready for a quick exit." "Understood, Captain," Tinny replied. "I'll keep the engines warm." The Unreliable descended, its landing gear protesting with metal-on-metal groans that could wake the dead. But it held firm, settling onto the crusty earth like an exhausted bird. "All right, team," Rylan said, unbuckling his harness. "Let's see what's behind door number 1. The ramp lowered, revealing a landscape more welcoming to roaches than humans. But this was what they signed up for, and so they stepped out into the unknown. The bunker loomed before them, an ancient relic that had somehow escaped the ravages of time and cultists alike. A miracle, or just the universe's way of setting them up for a bigger fall. "Anyone else have the heebie-jeebies?" Jackson asked, peering into the shadows with an exaggerated shiver. "Just you and your overactive imagination," Tessa replied, though her hand rested on her weapon. The door had survived countless years, but the locks, not so much. A few well-placed kicks and the path was clear, an invitation if ever there was one. "After you," Rylan said, gesturing grandly as if they were entering a royal palace instead of a musty old vault. "Chivalry isn't dead after all," Tessa remarked dryly, stepping inside. The interior was a maze of corridors and dusty rooms, the air thick with a sense of history and lost purpose. Ryland's eyes scanned the walls, looking for anything that might hint at the technology they so desperately needed. "Looks like a whole lot of nothing," Jackson said, kicking at a loose tile. "Patience is a virtue," Ryland replied, though he felt the weight of time pressing down on them. Every second they spent searching was a second closer to discovery by their enemies. And then, in a room that seemed indistinguishable from the rest, they found it. A console, still functioning despite the years. The screen flickered to life, casting an eerie glow across their faces. "I'll be damned," Tessa whispered, a rare break in her usual composure. "Looks like we hit the jackpot," Ryland said, unable to keep the triumph from his voice. The console held data, reams of it, detailing technologies long forgotten. Weapons, defenses, power sources, the kind of tech that could turn the tide in their favor if they played their cards right. "We need to get this back to the ship," Ryland said, already imagining the possibilities. "Tinny, start transferring the data." "I'm on it," Tinny replied, her voice crackling through their comms. As the data flowed, Ryland felt a spark of hope he hadn't dared entertain in years. This could be it, the edge they needed to fend off the cultists and maybe, just maybe, earn a little peace. "Captain, we've got company," Jackson warned, eyes wide as he scanned the horizon. Of course, the universe couldn't let them have this win without a catch. "Figures. Cult ships inbound," Tinny confirmed, her voice laced with urgency. "I'd say we've overstayed our welcome. Everyone back to the Unreliable," Rylan ordered, the tone of command unmistakable even amid the chaos. "We've got what we came for. Now let's make sure we live to use it." They sprinted back, the rocky terrain barely slowing them as the cult ships drew closer. The Unreliable stood waiting, engines humming with barely contained impatience. "Jackson, get us airborne," Ryland shouted as they raced up the ramp. "Tessa, keep those ships off our tail." "Tinny, tell me you got the data," Data secured, Captain, Tinny replied, her voice a beacon of calm amid the storm. The Unreliable lifted off with a lurch that rattled bones and nerves alike. But they were airborne, and that was all that mattered. Those ships are closing fast, Tessa reported, her fingers dancing over the weapon's console. I hope you've got a plan. Survive, Ryland said, his eyes scanning the controls for any edge they could exploit. And make sure they don't. The cult ships bore down, their intent clear in the aggressive maneuvers that promised nothing but destruction. But the Unreliable was quick, agile, and bolstered by the very technology they sought to reclaim. As the battle unfolded, Rylan and his crew danced through the chaos, each move calculated to keep them one step ahead of oblivion. The cult ships were persistent, but they hadn't counted on the desperate genius of a crew with nothing to lose. Tessa, fire at will, Rylan ordered, feeling the adrenaline surge as the first blast rocked the enemy. The sky lit up with the glow of energy weapons, a deadly ballet of light and death that pushed them to their limits. But in the chaos, there was a rhythm, a grim poetry that spoke of survival against impossible odds. We've got them on the run, Jackson crowed, his voice equal parts triumph and disbelief. Don't count your chickens, Rylan warned, though he couldn't help but share in the momentary victory. The cult ships faltered, their resolve breaking under the unyielding assault. It was enough to give the Unreliable the opening they needed, a chance to escape into the void and live to fight another day. Punch it, Jackson, Rylan commanded, feeling the familiar pull of acceleration as they broke free of Earth's gravity. The stars blurred once more, a tapestry of light that promised freedom if only for a moment. But it was a moment they had earned, and one they wouldn't squander. Looks like we made it, Tessa said, her voice carrying the weight of exhaustion and relief. For now, Rylan replied, though the grim satisfaction of a battle won was undeniable. As the crew settled into the familiar rhythm of space travel, the data they'd recovered loomed large in Rylan's mind. It was a trump card, a chance to turn the tide for more than just themselves. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. A future where the cultists were the ones running scared, and humanity had a chance to reclaim its destiny. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. Because in the vast, indifferent universe, sometimes the only thing you could rely on was the crew crazy enough to follow you into hell and back. And Rylan wouldn't have it any other way. The Unreliable coasted through the black, leaving behind a smoking Earth and a horde of cultists probably rethinking their life choices. Rylan Voss slumped in his seat, staring at the blinking lights on the console as if they'd somehow morph into something useful, like a winning lottery ticket or a bottle of whiskey. Well, that was a day at the office, Jackson quipped, leaning back so far in his seat he was one yawn away from a nap. More like a week in hell, Tessa replied, eyes still glued to the radar screen, as if expecting the universe to lob another curveball their way. What's next, Captain? Tea with Ardek pass, Rylan said. I'm not much for cultist hospitality. Their idea of a welcome mat is usually explosive. He rubbed his temples, wishing headaches weren't such a prominent feature of his life. But if wishes were FTL drives, they'd be sipping cocktails on a beach planet instead of scraping by in the galaxy's armpit. We got the data, Tinny piped up, her holographic form flickering like a ghost caught in a bad holo thriller. All we need is someone clever enough to decode it. And by clever, you mean not us, Jackson interjected, a grin tugging at his lips. Because if it was us, we'd be in a whole different line of work. Or retired, Tessa said, on a nice planet where the only explosions come from fireworks on holidays. Speaking of nice planets, Rylan said, tapping the console, let's find somewhere quiet where we won't get shot at for 5 minutes. I'm tired of dodging laser fire, setting course for anywhere but here, Jackson replied, plotting a course through the star-speckled void. As they drifted, Rylan let his thoughts wander through the chaotic mess they called recent history. The Interstellar Council, the cult, the endless run-ins with the universe's least pleasant individuals. It was enough to make anyone question their career choice. But in the silence of space there was a certain peace, a space to think, to plan, to brood. "You think we'll ever catch a break?" Tessa asked, her voice slicing through the quiet. "Define break," Rylan countered. "Because if you mean a break like a nice holiday, then probably not. But if you mean not dying horribly in a vacuum, well, we've been pretty good at that so far." "High standards," Tinny commented dryly. "But I suppose survival is more of a priority than comfort." "Speak for yourself," Jackson said. "I'd like to survive comfortably if it's all the same to you." "Dream big, Jackson," Rylan replied. "One day we'll have a ship that doesn't squeak like a rat every time we hit a bump." The unreliable shuddered right on cue, as if to remind them that it was still there, still ticking along despite the odds. Rylan couldn't help but smile. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "So, what's the plan with this data?" Tessa asked, leaning back and rubbing her eyes. "I doubt we're just going to hand it over to the council with a bow and a thank you note." "Hell no," Rylan said. "The council can shove it. We need leverage, not more oversight. Plus, they'd probably just lose it in some bureaucratic black hole, or sell it to the highest bidder," Jackson added. "Probably back to the cultists, knowing our luck." "Exactly. We need to find someone we can trust," Rylan continued. "Or at least someone who hates the cultists more than they like us." "Sounds like a needle in a haystack situation," Tinny observed. "More like a needle in a supernova," Tessa said, but there was a glimmer of determination in her eyes. "But hey, we've done worse." "Exactly," Rylan agreed. "It's about time we played them at their own game. Keep 'em guessing, keep 'em worried." The crew fell into a comfortable silence, the kind you find after surviving yet another brush with violent obliteration. The stars stretched out before them, a reminder that for all the chaos they'd endured, there was always more chaos somewhere else. "Captain," Tinny said, cutting through the reverie, "we've got a ping on the comms. If it's another hymn, I think I'll pass," Rylan said, grimacing at the memory of their last encounter with the cultists' musical tastes. "No hymns, promise," Tinny assured him. "It's actually coming from Solstice Junction." "A message for you, Solstice Junction." Jackson frowned. "Wasn't that the place under Ardek's thumb?" "Yeah," Rylan said, a note of suspicion creeping into his voice. "Patch it through. Let's see what's so damn important." The screen crackled and the face of Grogger, the station's self-appointed mayor and full-time screw-up, appeared. His face seemed more haggard than usual, if that was even possible. "Captain Voss," Grogger said, his voice a weird mix of relief and desperation. "Glad to see you're still in one piece." "Thanks, Grogger." "Can't say the same for my nerves," Rylan replied. "What's going on?" "Solstice Junction's a mess," Grogger admitted. "Ardek's crew pulled out, but they left it like a teenager's bedroom. We're picking up the pieces, but we could use some help." "Sounds like a personal problem," Jackson muttered under his breath. "Look, I know we're not exactly best friends," Grogger continued, a note of pleading in his voice. "But there's something here you might be interested in. Something the cultists left behind, more cult memorabilia." Tessa asked, raising an eyebrow. "Something better," Grogger said. "It's connected to that data you got. Might help you decode it." Rylan exchanged a glance with Tessa, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Why help us?" "Let's just say I owe some people a lot of favors," Grogger replied, looking like a man drowning in IOU. "And this helps pay some of them off, right?" Rylan said. "All right, Grogger, we'll swing by. If you're pulling my leg, though." "Wouldn't dream of it, Captain," Grogger interrupted, managing a weak grin. "See you soon." The screen went dark, leaving them with a decision looming like a hangover on the horizon. "Well, that's a twist," Jackson said. "So we trust him." "Trust isn't exactly the word I'd use," Rylan replied. "But we don't have much to lose by checking it out. Besides, maybe he'll be so grateful he'll forget about those favors. And pigs might fly," Tessa said, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "Stranger things have happened," Rylan said, plotting a course for Solstice Junction. "Let's see what the universe has in store for us next." The unreliable turned towards Solstice Junction, engines humming a familiar tune as they slipped through space. The stars seemed to lean in, as if waiting for the next act in the cosmic drama that was their lives. As the ship cut through the void, Rylan wondered if maybe, just maybe, they were on the verge of something big. Or maybe it was just another wild goose chase, a chance to get shot at by new and interesting people. Either way, they were in it together, and that was something. The journey to Solstice Junction was mercifully uneventful, a fact which made Rylan almost suspicious. It was like waiting for the punchline in a joke that never quite landed. When they arrived, the station was as much of a hodgepodge as Rylan remembered it, a floating patchwork of metal and mismatched parts that shouldn't have held together by any known law of physics. But hold it did, a testament to human stubbornness and a lack of viable alternatives. "Ah, the junction," Jackson said with a mock sigh. "Home sweet home. Home's supposed to smell better," Tessa said, wrinkling her nose. "Can't have everything," Rylan replied, guiding the Unreliable into a docking bay that looked like it had seen better centuries. They disembarked with the kind of wariness that came from too many surprises in too short a time. Grogger was waiting, looking every bit the beleaguered politician trying to sell a budget that didn't add up. "Welcome back, Captain," Grogger said, managing a smile that was only slightly less forced than his last attempt at charm. "Just here for the treasure hunt," Rylan said, skipping the pleasantries. "So what's this thing you've got? Right to business, I see," Grogger replied, leading them through the station's winding corridors. "Can't say I blame you." The room Grogger brought them to was cluttered with relics that seemed to have been pulled from every corner of the galaxy. Random tech lay scattered like the aftermath of an intergalactic garage sale. "There," Grogger said, pointing to a device nestled among the chaos. It looked like an old comms unit, but older, meaner, and more likely to bite. "What's this?" Tessa asked, peering at it with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for unknown leftovers in the fridge. "Near as we can tell," Grogger said, "it's a decryption device. We think it's what the cultists were using to crack ancient codes. It might help with your data." Rylan walked over to the device, examining it without touching. It had the air of something that might explode if you looked at it funny, and he wasn't in the mood for fireworks. "Why leave it behind?" Rylan asked, still skeptical. "They evacuated in a hurry," Grogger said. "Apparently they didn't want to hang around for the fireworks either." Jackson leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "And you're just giving it to us out of the kindness of your heart. Think of it more as a loan," Grogger replied with a shrug. "I figure it's safer with you than here, where anyone could walk in and take it." "Generous," Tessa said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Let's just say I'm hedging my bets," Grogger replied. "Besides, maybe you'll remember this favor next time you're in the neighborhood." "Yeah, don't hold your breath," Rylan said, though there was a hint of a grin on his face. They took the device back to the Unreliable, securing it in the cargo bay with the careful delicacy usually reserved for explosives or diplomatic negotiations. "All right, let's see if this thing is worth the trouble," Rylan said, adjusting the seat as he prepared to test the device. "Here we go," Tessa muttered, watching as Rylan powered up the relic. The device hummed to life, its lights flickering in a pattern that suggested it hadn't entirely made up its mind about existing. "Looks temperamental," Jackson noted, his voice tinged with amusement. "Like everything else in our lives," Rylan replied, working the controls with a light touch. "All right, Tinny, let's see what we've got." Tinny helped interface the device with their systems, her holographic form flickering with concentration as she worked. "It's decrypting," she announced, her voice laced with cautious optimism. "We might actually have something here." "Well, I'll be damned," Rylan said, unable to keep the note of surprise out of his voice. "Thought you'd be used to miracles by now," Tessa said, though her relief was palpable. "Miracles? Maybe," Rylan replied. "But in this business you learn to take what you can get." As the data came to life on their screens, the implications sank in. They had a chance, a real shot at turning the tables. For once, they weren't playing catch-up. "So what's our next move?" Jackson asked, looking at the decryption results with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "First, we figure out what we've got," Rylan said. "Then we use it to make sure the cultists regret ever crossing us and the council. Tessa added, a note of concern in her voice. "We keep them guessing," Ryland said. "No more running. We've got the cards now, and it's time we dealt the hand." As they plotted their next steps, the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the